Welcome to Enformed Insights, the official podcast of Informian.com and your guide to the world of public records and data analysis. Join our host, Fred Pfeiffer, as he interviews industry experts and shares practical tips for navigating the future of digital information.
Kendall Peters, welcome to the Informed Insights podcast. It's great to have you here. To start, could you share some insight into your background and your role as the Director of Business Analytics for the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share a little bit about myself. I started actually as an intern with Orlando Magic. From there, became an analyst at the Vikings in 2015, and I've been at the Vikings since. So I've always been in sports, but have kind of grown in responsibility over the decade or so. And have always been in an analytics-focused role, probably pointed in different directions, sometimes a little bit more sales, sometimes a little bit more fan experience. And I think now, especially with increased responsibility, it's a lot more organizational impact and using that insight to drive more strategy. So even going off of that, I think is how I've been able to increase my responsibility and the same with the team over time. The data is great. I love it. But if it doesn't get converted into providing value for whatever stakeholders you're serving, you're probably wasting a lot of time and money too. So just continuing to find learning opportunities and ways to turn the data that we have into value. A lot of times it's through communication or visualization or like just sitting down one-on-one and being like, well, hey, what are you trying to do? And can we actually help you? And just using a lot of those different techniques and having a really strong team that's built up over time to do that is fortunately got me to where I'm at today.
Obviously, analytics are important for the team on the field, but could you give us an overview on how the Minnesota Vikings utilize data analytics in their business operations?
We basically centralize it between everything non-football, and football has their own analytics team. For us, we're central to the fans and all the departments internally to be like, are we providing the best value for the fans? Are we making the right decisions moving forward based on our mission and values and strategic plan? And those questions at a high level maybe sound easy to solve, but the worst thing you want to do is we have a lot of smart people here, but one of the worst things you want them to do is be taking guesses. We want to make sure it's either an educated guess or like confident decision to be like, I know when I make this decision, this will be the outcome. So we can spend that time and effort and investment to get the outcomes that we want in increasing fans, increasing sentiment, increasing engagement, increasing partnerships or sales or anything like that. So that is effectively why we're central. And I think probably one of the biggest outputs that we have is the clusters, like machine learning and clustering that we've put together about our fan base that we call personas, but it's, 6 different personas that we have that really talk about our fans through different lenses. It is not just demographic. It's also psychographic and qualitative, and we really like to focus on that piece to be like, if you're programming an ad buy or marketing message or social media or anything like that for someone who is a 50-year-old Minnesotan, that might work, but there's a broad splash of different types of people that fit that. However, if you do it on a more value-based to say this, we know a group of fans cares about philanthropy. The relationship to philanthropy and connecting that to the Vikings and community is why they are here. That's a little bit easier to program a message and not just miss out because you're thinking of a demographic or anything like that. So we have the personas, and that has really transformed the language that our staff have used internally. Instead of talking about fans or season ticket members or attendees, they'll talk about Sally's and Wade's and Ben's and all of that, which I think over time, hearing that literal language change has been pretty powerful to say, like, we've changed how people think and how they program and how they make decisions.
So I'd like to drill down a bit on fan engagement. How did the Minnesota Vikings use consumer data to enhance fan engagement?
Yeah, so many different ways, but I think from a broad level, I could tell you we try to look at our fan, I guess, journey in 3 different buckets. So the first one would probably be like the number that we are talking to, how many are in our database, social media and gathering them, like how many impressions are we generating. But that's very much more focused on like just high level numbers. If those numbers aren't high enough, then obviously there might be a problem in our communication efforts. But then when you really get to engagement, we think about sentiment and how people feel about us. So there's a lot of surveys and polls that go out there. We do a lot ourselves, and we aggregate all that information into our database and then populate these scores that really talk about like the health of our fans and how they feel towards us. And depending on the swings of those, will change different initiatives, different, research, different ways we'll position ourselves year over year. So again, that's all high level. I think some like more right down to the fan level where it affects is in our game presentation, in our in-stadium experience, in our digital experiences and programming, in our app is where you'll see a lot of those outcomes of like, hey, we need to focus on these Sallies more because they feel like they are missing out on the Vikings and they don't have enough time in their life to find the time for the Vikings. This is a pretty hairy problem to solve. The numbers help us more empirically say, hey, are we moving the needle there?
Can you share any specific examples of how data has influenced fan experience at the stadium or through digital platforms?
I think this is going a couple of years back, but really the data has been pivotal there in defining who is in the building. Again, I think I told you before, this power in language. And what we, years ago when I started the Vikings, a lot of times we talked about, again, STMs or season ticket members or attendees. Like those are the only people in the building, which is somewhat true. That's where the ticket originated. But where data has transformed us is, especially in the digital ticketing era, to talk about who is actually really in the building. And when we thought, hey, 100% of the people originated from like a season ticket or a season ticket member, we kind of debunked that. We're like, yeah, that number is closer to like 20 or 30%. So like anytime that you're in a building and you look around, 70% of the people you're looking at are not season ticket members. And that has changed a lot of how things have been programmed. And when you think about it from a partnership level, when you know that insight and to say, well, if I have exposure in the stadium, I might be reaching, 70% different people each game is a little bit more powerful than can I reach these 12,000 accounts 10 times or something like that. When you think about the game presentation experience, to know like there's a lot of unique eyeballs that are not going to get bored with the experience. I think that helps in terms of like staffing and what you actually want to do from that. And then we care very much about the stadium experience and the guest experience too. So to know a lot of people that you see, it's either their first time in the building or their only time in the building this year, kind of has changed how we process there. I say you have one shot to get this right, and if you don't, again, going back to your last question, our scores will probably suffer because of that. So we did cool visuals to make some of that pop and all that, but I think you can see how the stem of that like insight changed so many different thought processes here.
Post-COVID, with many of our partners, we've seen an increase in the velocity of change in some core identity markers, name, email, phone, and address. What types of consumer data do you collect, and are you seeing a similar pattern? How do you keep up to date with those changes?
We maybe are a little bit, probably similar to a lot of other sports teams and properties, but maybe more unique compared to other businesses. So like the data we collect a lot of times is not fully proprietary towards ourselves, but think about ticketing, concessions, merchandise, digital, e.g. like our app, website, all that. That is the type of data that we're collecting around our fans and like trying to understand the journey and the path they're on when it comes to game day, or even like the 355 days where they're not necessarily coming to US Bank Stadium. It gets us closer to like a full circle experience of like how are they engaging with us. A lot of that is through other vendors, so e.g. like the Ticketmasters, the Airmarks, the Fanatics of the world, where we have partnerships with them to see it's our data, but obviously they help us attain it too, and then we'll put it into our data warehouse. That's kind of how we're set up. And I think speaking to over time, like we're constantly monitoring trends. Like some might be the behavior again about who is in the building and are like different types of personas showing up at different levels. And if we project that out, what is that going to mean for our strat plan in 2025 and 2026? Some trends like that, thinking about demand and putting in macroeconomics. So all of that we absorb and try to push out into different models, or at least like visuals to say, where do we need to go in the future? We typically look at it year over year, but there's a lot of conversations too that are probably a couple of years out with it. And I guess the last part to answer your question, I'll bring it back to personas as well. One of the biggest we've noticed significant change in them, especially like pre and post COVID. As I mentioned, a lot of it was focused on values and psychographics. We had personas who were like, I don't really care about football or the product on the field. I more care about who the players are, something like that. in the years ago during COVID, like when you took away so many other things that you couldn't do, we started to see these people say, you know what, cool, like I'm leaning all the way in. Like I care about the X's and O's and all of that. And some of those themes haven't left. So it's a really cool exercise in like change management, human behavior, to follow some of those trends and then make sure that we account for it, to be like the different products we put out there are going to resonate in different ways. And again, make sure our strategic plan gets us to meet the people where they're at, which, hey, is subject to change at any time.
Can you share a case study where data-driven marketing significantly boosted engagement or sales, for example, in tickets, merchandise, whatever example you'd like to share?
I can maybe flip that and talk about retention. And so I would say we care about our season ticket members very much, and we have been monitoring trends with them for years now. And a few years back, basically established KPIs, and we saw like a couple of them, those key areas were slipping. So we did additional research, focus groups, all that fun stuff, and pushed out the insights back again, did some testing on there, like some A/B testing and conjoint analysis on like what would work. And we really established a new investment for our season ticket members, which we are fortunate enough to be sold out or effectively sold out of season tickets. So it's not creating like net new season ticket members or new revenue. But from a retention standpoint, we feel incredibly confident that the work and the investment we put into them is keeping them around, not just for 24 or 25, but if we keep it up, we'll have them long term. So it's something that if we weren't monitoring those trends and reporting over time, you might not have noticed and then been like, oh my goodness, we just realized we lost half of our attending base. Pretty cool to know that again, not just data and analytics, it took the full Vikings effort in terms of revenue and sales and marketing to make those outcomes happen. But starting with the data to really boost the retention is pretty cool.
We recently spoke with Will Albers of the NFL about NEPA, a term he used to identify name, email, phone, and physical address. And he mentioned how important it is to update those specific identity markers. How do you address that challenge? To keep the fan data updated and as accurate as possible, what practices do you employ to get that right?
Yeah, so ticketing is a big part of where new fans come from. But, right now, my team is probably annoyed with me, but I feel like we call it the year of lead generation. So we are focused on a lot more new leads and creating them and going off of that progressive profiling and boosting the amount of profiles. So NEPA, I think, is important, but even learning so much more about them. Again, we want to get to like all the factors that help us feel confidence in predicting a persona is the name of the game and what we're about. I think there's levels, and I haven't fully structured it in my head, but yes, level one is to make sure like there's probably a marketing funnel, like have awareness, interest in the Vikings. Cool. Like that's probably not a database play. But then level two is once you reach enough there, we need to be capturing you in these different mediums. Ticketing is a big part. The other parts of lead generation, contests, events, sweepstakes, signups, and things like that. Having that then housed centrally into a warehouse and running through identity resolution is super important. But when you're starting at like first, last email, that only goes so far. The third part, I think, is of significant value when fans have interest, have identified themselves to you, and now are like, because you're providing value back to me, I'm going to give you deep detail, like colleges and universities or number of kids that I have or other passionate areas of my life, favorite player, like that type of fun stuff. When you have that, then the profile gets really cool to play around with and to make sure we turn around into cool marketing messaging, good sales messaging, good retention. and all of that. So I think I probably bounced around to answer your question, but that's how we think about it. NEPA is incredibly important, which probably is kind of step 2 of my process. But step 3, after we get that, we care about getting to a couple more key fields to then get really predictive with our persona models. And yeah, we monitor that over time. So we have dashboards up that talk about the new context that we have. Where did they come from? What are we going to do with them? If we don't have enough information, we'll load them directly into our email service platform and then start like journeys for, can we get progressive profiling information on you from there? And not really part of identity resolution, but we do care about the value of fans too. So we have some modeling going on in the background. It's like, depending on what source or like how you came to know us, we are assigning some value to you and can then use that to say how much more of investment, whether it is time or money, do we want to spend on lookalikes or things like that.
Obviously, the Vikings have a rich, long tradition with so many Super Bowl appearances in the 70s, the Purple People Eaters. I consider them to be an organization like my beloved Bears and the Dallas Cowboys, teams with a national interest. How do you address the different needs of the season ticket holders and fans who are more local to Minnesota to fans engaged with the team outside of Minneapolis, more on a national level?
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that. I think that's incredibly important to us. I think without like going super deep into the numbers, a lot of the ways fans engage with us and like where we would see a lot of revenue from them comes through like ticketing and attendance. And that's probably true for many other teams. But yeah, it matters, all the other fans that we have. And we even have the international rights for the United Kingdom and Canada. So building and understanding the fan base internationally is of importance to us. What we can't do is move US Bank Stadium to all these other areas. And so now if these fans would like to travel and come, like we can accommodate and provide packages and all that. But purely just from like a value standpoint, for a lot of people economically, that is not the best decision to make for them. And so in other ways to reach them is where we focus. We're partnered with Fanatics on the merchandise side. A big part of that is because of how wide their network is and reaching and understanding people and making sure like if you can't come to US Bank Stadium, but you still want to feel a part of the team through buying merchandise, we want an easy and barrier-free way for you to do that. So that certainly is a decision that we've made that was thinking about our fans that were not just local. We also have what we call fan networks, but includes watch bars and fan groups from all these different areas that are like recognized by our team internally and officially recognized, I guess I should say. And so we really think we've done a lot of research in like what moves them and what motivates them and want to continue to build out those groups as like key leaders, I guess, within our fans. But like every fan is super important, but those are probably the ones that kind of move the needle in these areas that are 100, 200, 500, thousands of miles away from us. So yeah, that's the next thing that is on the docket for us. How do we grow groups like that, make sure they are more engaged, and make sure we can probably provide something to them outside of merch and certainly like digital social. We think about them as well, but there's definitely some value prop on the table for them that I think we can meet some needs for and create new, more long-lasting relationships.
What is the biggest challenge in collecting and analyzing consumer data today? And how do you address that challenge?
I think maybe I can answer that from 2 angles. So from the extrinsic angle, data privacy, I think, is a big challenge, not a challenge that is a bad one. We want to make sure we are good stewards of the data for our fans, things like that. But laws continue to pop up and governance continues to pop up. And certainly we want to make sure we are legal and compliant in those areas. But additionally, that I would be lying if I said that doesn't add challenges to like how we grab data, ingest it, how we apply it internally too. So staying up to date on that and making sure that we are always good stewards of the data is something that, years ago was not, we were thinking about what was not as top of mind, especially not from a legal and compliance standpoint. And then intrinsically, I would say, you probably talk to any analyst and I'd probably call it like the curse of the analyst is we sit on a bunch of data. That data does not matter until you turn it into insight, and turn that insight into strategy. And so yeah, there's always that to be like, tell me why this matters, and like work with my team about telling me that why that matters. I have to work with myself about making sure I spread that correctly to leadership. You can always find data to support something, but conveying the right value and working on the right message, the right way to communicate that, whether it is story and verbally or visually, which typically, like based on how the human brain reacts, usually good bets to have, is something that is never perfected and constantly working on. So yeah, I think there's two motivators, intrinsically and extrinsically, when we think about challenges with data.
What advice would you give to someone looking to pursue a career in data analytics within the professional sports vertical?
I'll probably say have empathy, and I can elaborate on that a bit. But if you don't understand what your end users' pain points are, whether that is for the fans or whether that internally that is for your sellers or servicers or anything like that, if you don't understand what their pain points are directly with their goals or like just in their lives with the day-to-day, it's going to make your job as an analyst or an analytics professional so much harder. So to have that empathy and to focus in that way, I think helps you reach them and create bridges in different ways. And those bridges really establish so much trust. So then when you get to the fun stuff about like reporting and analytics and insight, you're not worried about mistrust or anything. I think you're in that together to be like, hey, we had this insight is not just because Kendall cares about data. It's because Kendall has found a way to like solve your problem or make your life easier truly and not just surface level.
So the team went from Kirk Cousins at quarterback, who by all accounts was a tremendous individual and beloved in the community. He leaves for Atlanta, and Sam Darnold is signed to start. You also draft an exciting young quarterback in J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, who I am familiar with since he played high school at Nazareth outside of Chicago. He seems like a great kid from a great family. But do these massive changes on the field in any way impact you and your role with the Vikings?
I would say no, they don't massively impact what we do, but we're always, like I said, we're always monitoring different trends and things like that. And again, it'd probably be naive to be like a big shift at quarterback like that doesn't affect the mind of our fans, whether that is positive or negative or neutral. So to make sure we're cognizant of that and knowing like where that sentiment is shifting and continuing to reposition ourselves in those way or anticipate potential obstacles or potential opportunities based off those shifts is usually the name of the game. So yeah, Kirk was amazing around here and in the community and did a lot of great stuff on the field, and wish him the best of luck in Atlanta. We'll see with J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold now at the helm. We'll see where we go with it. I think from what we've seen within our data, there's optimism within the fan base at this time, right? Like let's, when we talk midseason, Fred, and we're like 8-0, I think that optimism is going to turn into pressure to deliver at the end. Yeah. Obviously, I'm knocking on wood there, but the optimism right now, I think, is what we continue to lean on in terms of like messaging, sales, marketing, how we position ourselves to say there's a bright future for the team in different ways. Who is at quarterback, obviously who is like at receiver and all these other positions. So if that is your groove and like why you are with the Vikings, we're leaning on that. If it's not, like the quality of the people that we have, I don't know J.J. McCarthy that well, but like you said, I've heard a lot about how the quality of person, like to lean in that way is exciting as well.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating year. As someone who is a diehard Bears fan, it is a buzzsaw division. You have the Lions playing well. The Packers are a team loaded with talent. The Bears are much better. I expected the Vikings to take a step back with the younger direction, but the head coach and the support staff are elite. It's going to be fun over the next few years to see where our beloved teams go.
I love it.
I want to thank you so much for your time today, Kendall. Where can people find you? If listeners want to learn more about Kendall Peters, can they reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Maybe I don't know if there's like show notes or anything, but to put it in there, I'm Kendall Peters on LinkedIn. You'll find me, the Director of Business Analytics at the Vikings, and maybe I can give you my direct link. It's probably something like LinkedIn/Kendall Peters, and then go from there.
Thanks for listening to Informed Insights. To learn more or listen to another episode, please visit Informian.com.